get it twisted. This rap is my motherfucker of game. What you heard is what you hearing.
Hey, didn't see you there. I'm Will Jarvis, and we're going to take you through the Reagan presidency. Let's go. Hello there. I bet you're wondering who Ronald Reagan was. Well, the rest of America was too, until in 1978 he announced that he was running as a Republican candidate in the 1980 presidential election. In 1978, it became clear that there were big changes coming in the American economy. There was a California tax revolt, known as Proposition 13, that sort of made a big change in the real estate housing market. It capped the perceived value of a home at 1%, and the taxes couldn't increase any further. So this led to a big decrease in revenue, and it forced government cuts. So this showed the power of when the people revolted against something in the government, it showed that they could really make a big difference. And this led to a new economic time period. So the other big event leading up to the 1980 presidential race that is believed to have cost Carter his re-election was the Iranian hostage crisis. So this began in late 1979, and it ran all the way through Reagan's inauguration date, 444 days. So basically what happened was the Iranian Shah, who was very unpopular with the radical uprising in Iran, was admitted into the United States for cancer treatment. And this really angered the Iranian people because they didn't like that the US was intervening. So a bunch of radicals led by Ayatollah Khomeini, they rushed the US embassy and took numerous hostages. And this lasted for 444 days. And incidentally, this ended right after Reagan's inauguration, just moments later, and the hostages were released. So, the 1980 election saw incumbent President Jimmy Carter, the Democrat, facing off against Republican Ronald Reagan. Reagan was running with George H.W. Bush, and Carter's vice president was Walter Mondale. There was also John B. Anderson, who was a Republican congressman from Illinois who ran as an independent. Reagan won in a landslide, thanks to the aforementioned crashing economy and the Iranian hostage crisis. The electoral votes were really a blowout. It was 489 to 49. Although the popular votes were a lot closer. It was 43 million to 35 million. So it was still a fairly large margin, but it was a lot closer than it looked in the electoral votes.
Hey, do you know anything about new conservatism?
Oh boy, do I. It was one of the programs that Reagan was really a representative of. It denounced activism government and it championed what was the common man. So Reagan believed that the government was intruding too deeply into American life. He wanted to cut programs he contended that the country did not need by eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. Throughout his tenure, he also pursued a program of deregulation, more thorough than that begun by Jimmy Carter. He sought to eliminate the regulations that would affect the consumer, the workplace, and the environment. And he argued that these were inefficient, expensive, and they impeded economic growth. So, in addition to new conservatism, there were a few other things that were really associated with Republicans during this time. One being religious fundamentalism. They opposed equal rights, gay rights, abortion, and SALT treaties. They lobbied for prayer and creationism in public schools, and they wanted to return to the foundations of faith and have more of an impact on state policy rather than big government policy. This tied into their crusade for small government, which was a part of Reaganomics, which we'll talk about later. They wanted a smaller government, which would lead to less bureaucracy and freer markets. They wanted to dismantle the welfare state that had really been building up since FDR's presidency and the political changes that he had introduced as well that were sort of being built on by every president that came after the next. He wanted to reduce the power of labor unions and the government and business, so he took on a laissez-faire type of mindset, and he believed that free markets equaled free people and less government represented a safer country. Another thing that he believed in was deregulations, which lifted restrictions on businesses, industry, and other activities that had been imposed by previous presidents. Hey, so supply-side economics was Reagan's belief in cutting taxes and government spending to stimulate the economy through investment, promoted private enterprise, and this would give the wealthy the ability to increase their wealth even further by putting their money into the thriving economy. So they sort of believed that if you gave the rich the money, they would use it to invest, and they knew how to use it, and this would in turn get the economy going, and it would trickle down, which was another part of his economic beliefs, which were known as Reaganomics. Reaganomics was the term for Reagan's economic policies. He called for widespread tax cuts for everybody, including the wealthy, which was very rare because usually when taxes were involved with the wealthy, they were being imposed in heavier ways rather than being lifted and having less taxes. He wanted to decrease social spending and increase military spending, and he wanted to keep the government out of the economy, like we mentioned earlier, in a laissez-faire style. He used supply-side economics, known as trickle-down economics, to keep the upper class, lower, and middle classes going, because the wealth would start up high, and it would sort of trickle down to the lower classes. Hey, on March 30th, 1981, just 69 days into Reagan's presidency, there was a scary moment as John Hinckley, sort of a crazy stalker of an actress, cut off Reagan as he was leaving a speaking engagement at a hotel in downtown Washington, and he tried to shoot him. 3 other people were injured, and Reagan was jumped on by the Secret Service, and no real damage was done, but it definitely shook him up, and it was sort of a huge event, obviously, as an assassination attempt, and Hinckley was sent to prison. During Reagan's presidency, he hired 3 new Supreme Court justices. The first was Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman on the Supreme Court. She was a conservative from Arizona. Next was Anthony Kennedy, a conservative justice from California, and then finally there was Antonin Scalia, who passed away recently, and he was a conservative from Virginia.
Hey, that was pretty boring, right? All that political nonsense. You know what's not boring? Reagan's second term. Come on, let's go learn about it. Well, the election in 1984, Reagan and Bush. Probably one of the best 4 years of the American presidency. As you may already know, Ronald Reagan won this election, but what you may not have known is that he won this by a landslide. Reagan had 49 states on his side and 525 electoral votes against Mondale's 13. Another cool fact you may not have known, this was the first year that a woman was represented in the campaign. Geraldine Farino, who was Mondale's running mate, had made a great impact in women's activism. Another cool fact, on staying on the topic of equality of opportunity, is that Jesse Jackson, an African-American preacher and civil rights activist, also decided to run. Sadly, though, no one believed that he would win the candidacy, nor the election. The moral majority, also called the Religious Right, was a civic organization that attempted to counter negative trends in the U.S. They would protest against movements like the legality of abortions, women's rights, and gay rights. They also believed that church and state should have less separation. Another group that came around in the early 80s were the young urban professionals, referred to as yuppies. Although more of a trend than a group, these were self-absorbed young people that had high-paying jobs and an affluent lifestyle. During Reagan's presidency, the United States relations with the Soviet Union had become much more friendly. A new leader was put into power named Mikhail Gorbachev, and they got along fairly well. Gorbachev had introduced 2 new ideals to the Soviets. He introduced perestroika, which referred to the reconstruction of the political and economic systems that were established by the Communist Party, and glasnost, literally meaning openness, which created a reform period, giving the citizens of the Soviet Union more freedom and more rights. During their first summit at Reykjavik in Iceland, they got as far as discussing the abolition of all nuclear weapons between the two of them. And just 1 year later, at their third summit in Washington, D.C., Gorbachev decided to succumb to his terms. And so, right there at that table in Washington, D.C. in 1987, Reagan and Gorbachev drew and signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which required the United States and the Soviet Union to destroy all nuclear missiles. Here's a clip of what it could look like. Wow, that's good stuff. This marked the first time that 2 superpowers agreed to reduce their nuclear arsenals. As a result of the treaty, the U.S. and the Soviets destroyed 2,692 missiles, and to this day, neither Washington or Moscow deploy such weapons.
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes, got nowhere to run. The night goes on as I'm fading away.
Actually, The moral majority, also called the moral majority, also called the religious right.
During Reagan's presidency, established by the Communist Party. Fuck. Fucking bitch. I can't do that. Be non-childish for a second. It's okay. Ready? Listen, ready? Look at me. No. Look at me. Scene.